My name is Emily, and I am the Graduate Program Coordinator for the EPL program. We are so excited to be hosting 4 wonderful alums for our future and current students. Tonight's panel is moderated by Program Director Dr. Ruben Jacobson. Dr. Jacobson is an alum of the MAT program here at School of Education. He has worked at the intersection of education, research, policy, and practice for nearly 20 years. In that time, he has researched and written about the growing field of school and community partnerships for organizations such as the Brookings Institution and the Center for American Progress. He also worked at the American Institutes for Research as an education research analyst and spent 2 years teaching in DC public schools. Dr. Jacobson also served as a deputy director for the Coalition for Community Schools at the Institute for Educational Leadership. We are very fortunate to have him here as the EPL program director and faculty member. And now I will turn it over to him for the alumni panel.
Thank you so much, Emily. Thank you for all you do for our students, our past students, our current students, and our students to be. Really grateful. We're really lucky to have you working with us and specifically working with our students. And welcome back, alum. Very excited to see all of you joining myself. You caught that. I got my master's in teaching, and that really at American, and that really set me on a direction that I hadn't anticipated taking. Down this world of school and community partnerships. And it just speaks to one example of the power of a program, also the power of your courses, the power of an instructor, the power of your classmates to be able to, no kidding, transform your life. So I'm really excited to hear from our alum and what they've been up to. I don't want to take any other time for introductions. I want to get rolling, and we'll start by asking every alum to introduce themselves, your name, job title, and a brief description of what you do, and then just kick us off with your answer to the first question, which is, why did you decide to pursue a degree in education policy and leadership at AU? And Yvette, why don't we start with you?
Hi, I'm Yvette Smith. I'm a development associate at Kid Power DC. It's a small nonprofit in DC that focuses on like a 3-pronged approach to improving students' lives, wellness, democracy, academics, all of it. And what I do there is I do all the communication and I work with donors. And at a nonprofit, you wear multiple hats. So I've also done accounting work, a little of everything, spicing it up. I actually went to AU undergrad, so I did a 5-year program at AU. I did the BA-MA program, or BA-MED, and for me, that just ended up being the best choice. I've always been interested in education policy, but that wasn't an undergrad program at AU, just the master's. So I knew from pretty early on that I wanted to take the education track at AU and just continue going with it. Yeah, that's me.
Excellent. Thanks. Amanda, can you go next?
Yeah, hey everyone. My name is Amanda Merced. I'm currently a teacher with the Yes Prep School District in Houston, Texas. And I'm also the owner of the Social Chariot LLC, which is focused around pretty much business marketing and helping folks figure out their logistics for their business. In terms of why I chose AU, I was out of undergrad for about 3-4 years at that point. I knew I wanted to get a master's, but I didn't know in what. So throughout the years after leaving undergrad, I was like, you know what? I love education. I know this is where I need to be, but I don't know to what capacity. So once I was just, I think, scrolling through Instagram and, everything works out, stuff starts popping up. And the next thing I know, it's like, hey, apply for AU. I noticed that I didn't have to take any type of, tests or anything. And I was like, you know what, let me look more into their programs. And the more that I looked, I could tell that this was a school that was focused on really preparing quality educators and quality people as opposed to what looks nice on paper. And I was really happy once I joined the program that it was more than what I expected it to be.
Thanks, Amanda. And Yvette and Amanda, tell us when you graduated also.
Yeah, I graduated fall of 2019. So about 2 years ago, about.
And I just graduated in December, actually. So fall 2020.
Okay, Alex?
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex Wolitzer. I graduated in fall of 2015, so a little while ago. I am currently a learning specialist at an independent school outside of DC and just recently accepted a position to move into a learning support divisional leadership role at another independent school outside of DC. I chose American because I was a DC Teaching Fellow, and the DC Teaching Fellows program had a partnership with American University, and it was a really good deal. And I can't say no to a good deal. And it also seems like an incredible program. I pursued education policy leadership with the hopes of moving into education policy and leadership. At the time, I was working for DC Public Schools. I had witnessed and been a part of a number of situations in which policy decisions really impacted students in a negative way, families in a negative way. And I wanted to learn more about why it's so hard to change those policies immediately and why it takes so much time and effort and a lot of people saying yes to things, and ultimately put myself on track to affect that in a really big way. I think that was everything you asked us to talk about.
Yeah, thanks, Alice. I mean, I think that's a very common story, right? Is people come, they're doing some work in the education space. I've used this example many times, but they look around and they're like, what can I do about this? Why is this thing happening? What can I do about it? What do I need to learn to make something happen? And that's the reason a lot of people come to AU, and we help you try to think about why it might be happening, what the skills are you need to make it to make the change. It's a lot of work, but it can be fun along the way. Tiara.
Good evening, everyone. Very good to see some familiar faces. My name is Tiara, and I am an effectiveness coach at TNTP. It's a very specific title, so typically I would just say that I'm an education consultant. I spend most of my days doing project-based work throughout Louisiana. So right now I'm working on a literacy and foundational skills project at a charter network here in New Orleans. I partner with school leaders to just execute like a clear vision for school literacy priorities, specifically around fluency. I study curriculum to support leaders and teachers with planning. I observe teachers and leaders, deliver feedback. And that's one project that I'm on. I'm also on another one that's just geared around teacher and leader support. It's pretty cool. I like it a lot. I graduated from American in the spring of 2020. May 2020, and I decided to pursue a degree in education policy because I wanted to grow my knowledge around state and federal education policy, as well as understand how local school systems and structures operated. I had been a classroom teacher for about 6 years, and each summer between there doing a policy fellowship for different nonprofits and organizations, but just realized that I really needed to grow my capacity in order to feel confident to take up space and to feel like a competent leader. And that's what it did.
Great. Well, let's stick with you, and Tiara, because you're leaving us with this, like, what you came for and what you got out of it. And I wanted to ask about the journey to your current job. And this is going to be for anybody who wants to answer, but I'll direct it to you first. How did you figure out what career pathways to take after graduation, and what was your journey to your current job?
Immediately when I graduated, I just took a class that semester around the economics of education and really wanted to get a return on my investment in education. So finding a job outside of the one that I had at the time was top priority. It was the start of the pandemic. Things had shut down school. I was teaching at the time. It was chaotic. I felt unsuccessful. And my job actually only offered $700 annually for my new master's degree. And I was like, absolutely not. That's not what I learned in class. And so immediately started talking to Professor Jacobson, started looking up other opportunities and just trying to figure it out. I got a new job rather quickly. It was I had done some work with him in the summer And it kind of just continued on. I also took on a part-time consulting gig, which I really decided on that with actually one of my professors, a stats professor, Professor Scott, who I was like, hey, I think this project looks identical to what we just did in class. I think it would be a good fit. I'm not sure if I'm like qualified enough for it yet. And he was like, absolutely, you know what you're doing. This is like the first step to actually using those skills in the real world. So it was a rather smooth transition that was aided by professors and just drive to not want to be in the classroom anymore.
I'll just leave it open for whoever else on the panel might want to answer. Journey to your current job, and how did you figure out what career pathways to take after graduation?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and jump in. At the time, ending and closing in on graduation, I was a manager at a spa at the time. I was taking a break from education to pursue the rest of my education. So once graduation hit, I knew, I'm going to close out this chapter. I'm ready to go back to education. Let's see what that looks like. Similar situation, the pandemic hit, kind of took that opportunity to leave the job that I was at and just kind of work on my own event planning work, which ended up bringing me into Houston originally. So now that I was in this place, luckily through my sorority sister, she let me know of an opening at this public charter school called Yes Prep. And I'm like, oh, let me look them up, see what they're about. And they were so aligned with my values as a person, as an educator, just in terms of like having that equitable education, having the space, flexibility, and funding to do a lot of the things that we were talking about in class. So, I knew at that moment, I'm like, I have to have this job. I know that in the long run, I don't want to be a teacher in a classroom. I think my talents are larger than that, and I need to help in a different capacity. And I'm at this place now where I'm just like, I'm putting in the work in terms of being a teacher, in terms of getting to know the system better, learning those kind of pushback moments on implementation that they're having, so that as I'm going into these spaces of applying for higher roles within this district, it's made it easier to do so because of the confidence that I got through AU, or because of the support that we got, because of the flexibility that we got. So now I'm in a place to where I know I have such a big network with me that I have the confidence to still kind of figure out and play with where is my sweet spot. I know it's not education. I know it's somewhere in policy, but now I can figure that out through my networks that I've gotten through AU, as well as this continual growth that I've had because of my mindset and because of the people that I've met at AU as well.
I'm going to hop onto that. I think, one of the things Amanda kind of spoke to is this like weird kind of combining of things, using your degree in tandem with other skill sets, right? And we all bring so many different things to the table. Like no one on this call, either with a degree or in progress to get one, is just an ed policy and leadership person. And you have no other skills and you have nothing else to offer the world. And for me, I personally decided to pursue in part the policy leadership track because one of the things that was offered to us was special ed. And as a special education fellow who taught in a special education classroom, who has special needs personally, who's done so much of that work, I thought, okay, let me take that degree of experience and combine that with my ed policy leadership studies into something that is, not necessarily lucrative in the traditional sense, but lucrative really in a more legacy type sense that, generations after could conceivably benefit. So I've, I spent a while continuing to teach as a special educator, and then moved specifically into one-on-one work with students with learning differences and ADHD to deepen my expertise in that way and almost marry, again, like the academic degree with a de facto degree and experience and on in the trenches work, so to speak. So now in my new position next year, what I'll be doing is affecting the structure of the school and how they support atypical learners. And that's really because, what I bring in having been a special educator and focusing on differentiated instruction and quite honestly differentiated curricula to both engage and reach all learners, as well as my more formal studies in leadership have kind of prepared me more thoroughly to take on that role. So I guess the sort of lesson embedded in that story is to not put your blinders on and think about the generalizations you can make, or the kind of niche areas you can start to hone in on that really allow you to set yourself apart and dive more deeply into how you personally can use this degree and this experience.
Thanks, and congratulations. New opportunity. It's very exciting.
Thank you. I'm very excited about it. I literally accepted the job a week and a half ago.
I can say on top of that too that I was able to like tailor the degree a little bit to the nonprofit world. I took all the nonprofit classes that you could take because I knew that that's what I was interested in. But I was the student like since elementary school that I was like, who's making the rules and why do we have to follow them? Like I was constantly questioning that in the education world. It didn't make sense to me in high school, like the classes I had to take and why I had to take them. So AU taught me essentially to like keep asking those questions, like keep being a part of the conversation and keep probing, like who's making the rules and why do we have to follow them? And I just found that like super interesting. And I realized throughout like my time that the nonprofit world was where I wanted to be, just because I didn't have to answer to who necessarily was making all the answers. As a small nonprofit, you're able to like adapt and mold in your own way. And I realized that's like what I wanted out of it. But I was also the student to attend every single office hour for every professor and say, how did you get to where you are? Because I didn't know like how the trajectory looked. So after talking to a lot of professors, I was able to also like get connected to different organizations through that way, while also like being told like different avenues that I could explore too, which was really helpful because like Alex was just saying, I did kind of have my blinders on for the nonprofit world, but a lot of professors were able to like open up my eyes to other jobs that I didn't even know existed, whether that was from like them bringing in guest speakers or just their own advice. So that was also really helpful. And that's kind of how I figured out my career path that I'm on.
Great, thank you. And you might have picked up on this. I don't think we asked specifically, but Yvette and Alex were on-campus students, right? And Amanda and Tiara were online students. But when Yvette's talking about, talking to professors and growing the network and being exposed to jobs, we have these networks that are all over the country, right? A lot of our faculty are going to be participating in AERA, the American Educational Research Association meetings later this week. And when it happens, it's in person, it's 20,000 people. I don't know what's going to happen now. And we're constantly growing our networks. And sometimes those are people in other universities, but a lot of times, and what's I think different about the program that we're in is that we're really connected to the nonprofit leaders, to the policymakers at multiple levels. So we love doing that. But sticking on that, what advice do you have for other students, or for those of us, for those who are here, because I think there are some others who are also alum or current students, and we also have our prospective students on the call. What advice do you have about networking and preparing for the career search while you're a student?
I'm super, super big on networking. One, as an online student, I was sad because a lot of opportunities seem to be only in DC. So that kind of discouraged me at first. But as I kind of rounded my last semester, I forgot what project it was, but we had to work in a group and work with like a nonprofit group to like figure out a certain type of major policy issue. And through that project, I actually met like 2 or 3 people that lived in multiple states working on this work that I was able to connect with after the fact. And I was able to get job offers in Texas. So even though I'm not in some of those areas, I still have those connections to the point where I'm thinking about moving to a different state. Well, I now have 2 or 3 people from that project that I can reach out to. Hey, do you know anyone in these states doing this type of work? And they can directly connect me. So just definitely make sure, like, if you have an interest in something, speak up. It doesn't matter if you're online. It doesn't matter if you're not in that city, because somebody knows somebody that knows somebody. So if you're really passionate about making that your life's work or making it happen, the folks at AU will do what they can in their power, which is a lot of power, to make it happen. So just don't be afraid to speak up, no matter if this is, you know, your first, third, last semester. Really try to take that and run with it as much as you can, because what you put into this, our professors are willing to give back out.
I totally agree with that. I'm such a huge networker. I also think that, you know, it sounds really basic, but LinkedIn is your best friend, and you can search by American and just start, you know, cold friending people, cold connecting. And people do actually want to talk. There's nothing, you know, like teachers are always like, I'm done talking about the classroom. I'm done talking about education. You're not, you never are. You always want to talk about education. You always want to commiserate with somebody. And so if you reach out and you're just like, hey, you went to American, I went to American. No kidding. Let's talk about this crazy thing. I see you work at this school. You know, there's really nothing wrong with connecting with people who've either been in this program or a similar program. You have that American connection, and it's at least in my experience, it really, it's, people are very open to it. And I have actually, my new boss at my new school is an American professor, and she saw on my resume that I went to American. And she said, like, go after her. We want her. I know that program. And that felt amazing, and speaks so highly to the school that it would literally get you priority treatment in an interview process because there's experience there and familiarity with it. So LinkedIn, cold LinkedIn. And also, you know, ask people, if you know one person and you're maybe a little bit more shy. I mean, I don't know if it's clear, but I'm not shy. And if you find yourself a little bit more introverted or reluctant to reach out, if you've got an extroverted friend, have them make some introductions, because I guarantee you they will enjoy it, and bringing you into the fold and like enlarging their network. So, you know, leverage your connections, whether it's that one person, you know, introducing you to lots of people, or you getting out there and doing it yourself. Don't be afraid to use this. People like being connected through this connection.
I'll just add on real quick and say that everything Alex said is true. AU kids love AU kids. Like alum AU students want to see AU kids like do really well. So I also noticed that in the job process that like people were like, oh my gosh, you went to AU, we love AU students, like, and they get really excited. And also having a policy degree coming out of DC is also a huge deal. So people get really excited when they see that you did policy in DC, because they know that, like, this is so cheesy, but like DC is essentially our classroom too. Like especially this program, like we go outside of the walls of just AU, and people know that about the program. So they get really excited to see it. And AU kids just like love to see other AU people excel. So it's just like awesome that that community is like really, really vibrant and there for you too.
To layer on to all the wonderful things that have been said, a piece of advice that I would have for current students about networking would just be to talk to your professors. And one thing that really transformed my relationships with professors was attending the office hours. In those office hours, I was able to ask questions about the content, but also express like interest around certain policy issues, just like what skills, like I knew what I wanted to do every day, but not necessarily like what that job title would be. And so just having those intimate conversations and really developing a relationship. At one point, I felt so much pressure to get a job to where like every guest speaker, I was just like listening for something that might make me think that they were hiring. And I realized that that was selfish, and that was not a way to actually like build meaningful relationships that make you stand out. And so like outside of just thinking about like career advancement and like what can this person do for me or this organization, really taking the time to get to know folks and build those lasting relationships that might lead into something else.
Thanks. I think Yvette, maybe you have the tagline for Alumni Week. Alumni, AU kids love love AU kids. But it is really a strong and special network. And as we're growing this online program, it's just growing all over the country in ways that I don't know that we could have expected 5 years ago, or Alex, when you graduated, to see it like this. Um, let's think about some of the actual specific content and skills. I mean, when we talk about the program, I always tell students, look, we're going to give you the knowledge about policy and leadership. We're going to give you that content. You're going to understand what federal law is, how it interacts with state law and state policy, and so on. But in addition to the knowledge, you're going to get some skills that you're going to be able to add to your toolbox and take with you as you're packaging yourself. I forgot who talked about that. Alice, I think you were talking about how as you package yourself with your degree and your other experience. What was that knowledge and skills, or what content and skills helped prepare you for your job, or for even operating in the education field in that space? What was something you didn't know how to do before, and you left and you're like, now I know how to do this?
I would say it was a couple things for me. And I think also this program certainly, it kind of self-selects for people who already are natural born leaders and have some of those skills already, or, the sort of perspective that is required of someone who does policy or even legal type work. So I think that for me, and for some friends I had as well who were in the program, I think it really strengthened, put names to, and further developed a lot of those skills. I am a data person, and actually one of the things that I learned how to do that I think I probably really struggled with before was making data less scary for more educators. That is a skill that is so necessary to being an effective leader, where you really do, like it or not, have to use numbers, hard data, run regressions, God forbid, especially if you wind up in the policy world and you're doing more impact study work and things like that. You need evidence, and evidence is not he said, she said, it's numerical and it's data driven. So I would say that my stat class, as much as I loved math, helped me make it more accessible for teachers. And certainly with my students now, I use it all the time to help them understand their own learning profiles and things like that. So that was a huge improvement on the skill set that I already brought.
Alex, same. I was thinking stats, absolutely that class. It was the most challenging class, but also one that I literally take all the skills and information and apply it every day, with around interpreting data, how to make data tell the story and fit narratives. And especially when talking about equity, so many things come up. And just so the stats class and how to interpret data, how to find it, how to clean it, how to merge it, all of that are skills that I use every single day.
Go ahead, Yvette.
No, you go.
Okay. For me, I would definitely say the education law class just made me so much more aware of the injustices that are happening in our schools, and just things that a lot of districts and schools get away with that I wasn't aware of and that people weren't advocating for. So that really helped me being in a charter school space and just realizing how much freedom and flexibility that they have to help or harm our students. So I'm definitely in that place of where I'm really focusing on that implementation stuff that we learned. I think it was in one of our nonprofit classes as well. So I'm literally in the midst of, I wouldn't say fighting my school, but there's productive pushback happening between the content team of the district and the leadership at my specific school because of how they're handling things. So it's allowed me to be a voice and an advocate for my students as well as for my content. So literally currently being in the space, like this just happened last week, I'm so much more confident in my voice and how far I'm willing to really push this envelope for the sake of policy or for the sake of making sure that this implementation is happening properly and not just because it's easier for the teachers, but it's what's do justice for the students. So definitely that education law class and just anything around implementation steps were the two things that I've been using the most.
I would say similar for me too. I am not a data-driven person, but I definitely am one that looks at the whole picture. And like I said earlier, I'm always the one asking questions, and AU helped me answer some of those questions. And I've been using those answers to like guide my trajectory now. Like I've just constantly been questioning like, what is this education policy system that we use? Why is it working or is it not working? And what AU taught me is that it's working for the people it's meant to work for, which is what? White males, essentially. And how do we change the system? How do we affect that? And I've been able to like take these tangible, like big question ideas and answers and bring them into my own world, and like understanding how to create more equitable spaces in education. And while that seems like such a big answer, there are so many pockets that AU helped me like discover and ways to make it a more even playing field. And like knowing how to do that and carry that with me is like the biggest takeaway I got from the program. I wish I still knew how to use Stata, the program that we used for data, but unfortunately all of that has been erased from my brain. But all the big things that I've wanted to focus on and have been questioning my whole life still remain. And that's like what I've used as my biggest takeaway. Like, how can we use this space? How can we create a better place for all students? And I really feel like AU through this program like really nailed that in and was able to come up with tangible ways to do that.
I'm glad you brought that up. And anti-racism, fight for equity is so core to what we do as part of this program, because if I don't know how many people remember our mission, but it's nothing short of transforming societies. Like, not a small thing, and something I think that we all really believe in. And so the knowledge and the skills is all to that end. So I wonder if you could speak to your experiences. I know if most of you graduated before the pandemic, maybe just before the last summer, with the racial reckoning that we are kicked off. I'm not kicked off, continued, but in a new way that's still going on. And we all have to do is turn on the news and see the trial going on in Minnesota. How that influenced your experience in the program, or what from the program influenced the way that you think about racism, systemic change, structural inequalities, sort of the questions that you've already touched upon that you're bringing up.
I can kick that off real quick, but I graduated in December, so I was like halfway through the program and the pandemic hit, more than halfway through and the pandemic hit. So it was interesting. And as soon as the pandemic hit, all of the professors switched gears and were like, this is literally real world experience that we can take on right now. And it was like, what inequities do we see throughout this pandemic? And we were able to see so much. We were able to see the learning loss unfold like in real time. And our professors were sitting there and like, as future like policymakers, as future leaders, what can you do to make sure that this doesn't happen again? Those were questions that we were being asked, and that's like something that I just value so much, is like looking at the real world and understanding how we can use our degrees to help improve that. Also, I took classes over the summer and I had to take econ. And once again, I'm not really a data person and was not ready for econ, but shout out to Professor Shan, because he immediately was like, econ is one of the whitest fields out there. How do we diversify this? How do we get more people involved? What do the economic disparities show? And he just transformed the whole, I took it while this was happening, so maybe that was already going. But he was able to transform like the whole class and create it into an anti-racist space. And it was just really interesting to see how something that I had no interest in economics was able to create a way to like understand why our education system is the way it is and how to create a more equitable space using economics and using that as an avenue. And I just thought that was so fascinating throughout the class too.
I've had a very interesting experience after everything. My district has been amazing in terms of making sure to educate teachers on how to have these conversations of anti-racism with students, how to have it with families. The CEO of the district, of this charter school district, made like this whole addendum thing. Like, it was amazing the work that this district is doing in terms of making sure that we're really creating this equitable space for students. I think for me, the biggest kind of clash isn't even on the higher levels, but more so on those everyday levels. At my school, there was an instance where we had a teacher who's, kind of racist and who's made some comments to students that through my education law class, I was like, I'm pretty sure these are grounds for like almost firing, or you're playing some thin lines here. Let me go look at the handbook and get my receipts. So just kind of being really fueled by that, a lot of teachers were able just to kind of rally together and understand, like, yes, it's great that on paper, this is what this district is doing, but if we're not doing that on the ground level, it means nothing. So we're kind of in this fighting space of, here's a teacher that's doing things that isn't equitable or isn't right, but yet because we have a shortage on math teachers and because we're a charter school and because we have to do certain things, we can't really fire him right now. Or because we have, because of the pandemic, we're going to have to chalk up things to the pandemic. And if your student hasn't come to class at all, you still have to pass them with a 70. How am I teaching them resiliency? How am I teaching them that they can move past things? But yet, for the sake of your paperwork, I have to do X, Y, Z. I'm not okay with this. So I'm, again, literally just in that place where everything's just kind of clashing, because of the pandemic, because of the things that have happened in our society. It's still very much a living thing that's happening inside of our schools, even in Black and Brown schools. My school is predominantly Hispanic and Black, but even in that divide, there's a lot of intersectionality that even within our own communities, we haven't understood. People think, okay, as long as we're about anti-racism, we're good, we've done our job. No, because there's still colorism. There's still all these other things that are happening that we have to continue working. And if there's not enough people in administration who can do that, then we need to open up some more positions, or we need to open up the scope and broaden the scope of what these positions are covering. Because as this world is ever changing, as we understood in policy, or as we understand as educators, like, we need to keep pushing that. We cannot become complacent in that. So I'm definitely still have been fueled by this fire that has kind of carried us through this segment of education right now.
And I'll add on to that too. You never want to be the person who goes, let's talk about anti-racism, and I have, found that certainly. And one of the things that, I've given my experience and my background have been an advocate for in the last 12 months or so has been ableism as well. And dealing with the way that students who have special needs have been impacted by, and that's both diagnosed and undiagnosed as well. Because the reality is that all of us have some type of special need in some capacity. Some of them have nice little names and little symptoms that go along with them, and some don't. And especially for students who do not have the means to have a tutor come to their home every day and support them with their online learning environment, special education students or students who might be in need of special education services in any capacity have also been impacted in an incredibly discrepant way as compared with their typically developing peers. And that focus of equity work is something that has been very forgotten in some spaces and has been really hard to adequately address, especially as we talk about things like learning loss and FAPE and making sure that students who have special needs, and especially students who have special needs and other parts of their identity that have made life harder for them, be it socioeconomic status, race, religion, geographical location, making sure that that is a part of the conversation too has also been important, and something that, given my background in policy, I've actually been given the mic to talk about from time to time. which is invaluable. And I'm hopeful that it happens more at a much higher level.
I think the question for me right now is, and I bring it up to clients all the time and to like teammates, is just like, how can we continue to have conversations or like prioritize conversations around equity when it's not the explicit focus of the work that I'm doing? So if I'm working on a contract that's around literacy and teaching kids how to read in K2, and I'm with leaders and they're interpreting data and placing the problem and blame on children, and just like taking the moment then to interrupt that conversation, be mindful of how we're interpreting data and what we name as the problem, because that's where we'll start to look for solutions. And so really, I know we're not talking about equity or like diversity, inclusion, any of that. We're talking about reading, but actually there needs to be a conversation about that here, even if it's not explicitly the scope of the work that we're doing at the time.
Tiara, long A, Ara. If I could add on to that, you are so incredibly correct, and it is interwoven. What I say to my kids about, their disability or their learning difference, that doesn't stop from like between 8 or like happen for them between 8 a.m. and 3 p.m. That's their reality. So the conversations about their race and their religion and any other part of their identity is necessary to whatever it is you're doing, or at the very least, it's a reality, right? Like, so I agree with you that, you can't just say, well, this is this class, and that just doesn't come into the conversation here, or this is this work.
I appreciate everybody putting themselves out there and sharing their perspectives on this. This is something that as faculty, we're always working on it. And we had professional development today, which is really just conversations about how do we do this even better? How do we take stock of what we're not doing well and try to do it better in our classes, in the culture of our program. For those of you who have graduated, you might not see our newsletter, but we are doing an equity audit or analysis of our syllabi. So we're taking a real, we're always doing that every semester, every time we update our syllabus, but we're stepping back and saying, well, here's an opportunity to do even more. And to hear that this is something that comes up, it needs to be part of every conversation. That's what we talk about in our classes also. It's not education policy and research, and then there's the anti-racism stuff over here. We try to embed it in everything we do, to see you embedding it in the work, no matter what the topic is just so valuable and enriching to hear that. It is an exciting time. I mean, we've talked about some of the challenges, and I am going to ask a challenge, but I'm going to try to ask it in an opportunity way also. I mean, you either recently graduated, are graduating soon, or will graduate soon, in just like a very fascinating time in education, where money is flowing in, but also you're still going to keep on hearing people say that there's not enough money, right? I think society at large has a whole different perspective on the value of education and the value of schools, the importance of schools to the fabric of our society. And yet we're also seeing so many problems as well that we know we need to address. All this is happening. There's something's happening, right? A lot of things are happening. What does that all add up to? What does that all equal? What does that mean for you? So the question, since there were a lot of them there, is what do you think is the biggest challenge and opportunity right now in education policy and leadership from your perspective?
From my perspective, it's the learning gaps. And they're just looking at student data right now. It's very hard to like know where students, like they're just all over the place in, kindergarten, first grade, second grade. And because there's so many like learning differences and students are at different places, I think that the biggest challenge in ed policy right now is around state assessments. And it seems like, so far the current administration is really holding the line against issuing like blanket waivers, with just having recently rejected Georgia and South Carolina's request to cancel their standardized assessments this year. But I do think there could be possibility, because I know that was a part of your question, but because I guess there's possibility because it just approved Colorado's plan to reduce the number of tests, but not to eliminate them entirely. But I do think that there's nothing wrong with canceling the state assessments this year. Just thinking about it from a child's perspective or a student's perspective, sitting down and feeling defeated or like you don't know because the stuff on that test is not the things that you've learned, for whatever reasons, and there's so many. And so I think that that's the biggest challenge right now, but also possibility for us to rethink how we assess students. When is it appropriate? When is it actually useful? And how will this data be used? And so that's what I've been thinking about recently.
Getting a lot of nonverbal nods and support here. Amanda?
Yeah, I'm going to jump in with that, even going along with that as to why it should also be canceled and non-existent. A stronger push for social and emotional learning, and the proper implementation of those programs. Being in Texas, being in Houston, we have our own crap show of what's happening out here with things, which is safety in general and education. But really just pushing this is one of the biggest birthplace for social emotional learning, but a lot of schools like have these blanket programs or have restorative circles, but they don't know how to use them. They have no idea what to do. They're not trained on it. It just, again, looks good on paper that they're offering it, but they're not utilizing it. So we have so many good spaces that are happening. So I know in a lot of our classes, we kind of had like this feeling of, oh God, we're kind of hopeless right now because there's so much things that need to be changed. But no, there is some good work happening out here. And people are really trying to push for those changes, and they're being put in place. They're just not being implemented. So really, I think for me, at least I know for what I can control and kind of my focus of where I want to go next in my career is really just focusing on getting to a place of power where I can effectively make that implemental change, or like where I can be in a place to help create that change for it.
Also going off of that, I think that one thing we can all agree on is that nothing will be the same after the pandemic, just like in education, in our daily lives, like in everything. That's just like been quite clear from the beginning. And just as someone who works at a nonprofit who focuses on after school learning, we've learned a lot about how the nonprofit world is adapting and changing through this pandemic too, and how it's important for like communities to come together, band together, and focus. Basically what a lot of nonprofits did was started to expand their scope and started to understand the needs of students. And what people are doing is like including out of school time programs in with also like conversations at the district level. And it's important to make sure that everyone's involved and doing like all the same work and being on the same team. I feel like before the pandemic, it felt very like there were different pockets that people were in. Out of school programs were one, the district level was one, parents were one. And I think what this pandemic is able to do is like help bring everyone together and create a conversation as one and say, what do our students need and how can we help them with that? And I think that that's been really interesting, like seeing that through the nonprofit eyes of like being able to get out of school time programs more involved with like the decision making, because a lot of those programs are the ones that are able to successfully run like the restorative justice circles and things along that nature. Those are the people that are trained in it. So it's been really interesting seeing that and having different organizations like expand their scope and come together to create a better world for students.
I am very glad that I am not speaking to you in person because I feel tomatoes about to be thrown at me. But I will say that I'm a big fan of testing, but I'm a big fan of testing, but so I am a former DC public school educator. I taught a year for KIPP. I know the trials and tribulations well of the standardized test. I also am really well versed in the adaptive learning and assessment models, and do not understand why we cannot use those to adaptively and formatively assess students in order to determine their needs in a more holistic way. So I'm a big fan of testing. I say more testing, but it should be done differently and to a different purpose. It shouldn't be done with, to penalize teachers. Teachers shouldn't be penalized for not being able to teach students 3 years worth of math in a year for students who are unidentified with dyscalculia. Teachers and students shouldn't be penalized and stressed out by being asked to take a reading test that they are not prepared to take. And that being said, if you give them adaptive assessments that begin at their level and gradually increase in difficulty as they get more right, and gradually decrease in difficulty until as they get more wrong, you can better understand. We have lots of kids who have gaps, but they're not year-long gaps. Maybe they're concept-based gaps. Maybe they struggle mightily with part-whole concepts, but they get geometry like nobody's business. So there are ways in which testing and like government funded testing, because they're the ones with the money, right? Like, school districts are sitting there going, where's our money? Ed has it. So you can ask them. That could be revolutionary for students, and could also make the testing culture, which we have, which I hate to say, I really think is not going away, especially because of things like NCLB and EA, which I would personally flush down the toilet. Working within those established things that are not going to be, bygone anytime soon, getting creative and using them to our advantage, using the technology we have, using the funding from that federal level in order to implement something that is genuinely effective. More testing, but better.
And that actually just reminded me of something that they do at my school, and just kind of around that idea of, if testing isn't going away, how can we kind of change it to work for us, right? So something that my district does, there's this thing called common assessments. So it's kind of like a state test, but it's just more customized for this district, I guess. But what they've done to make it more equitable, in a sense, for all students who take this common assessment test, any missing grades that they have in their grade book for that content, that grade now replaces all of their missing grades. So I think if we can find ways to allow that to work on a larger level, maybe not mimic that, but just kind of going along with what Alex was saying, finding a way to more intentionally purpose these testing spaces, we may be able to come to some type of like center field with that. So I just thought that was an interesting thing that I'm not sure if other states do or other schools do, but that's something to maybe think about and how we frame testing or what we're doing with those results.
So the professor in me who's looking out and thinking about, oh, am I in class right now, would love to run with this conversation, because now we have different perspectives, which is what you get in a class, right? Which is what you get in this community. Of course, we don't have time for that. So instead, I'll just leave you with a closing question, which is, if you could give one piece of advice to because we do have a lot of prospective students on here, and newer students, to students at the beginning of their EPL AU School of Education experience, what would that piece of advice be? And if you wouldn't mind also throwing in something about your experience with your cohort, with your community, your peers, which we didn't get really to talk about, but I know is so valuable. And we'll close with that. So just a short piece.
Go for it, Tier.
You got, okay, all right. What's been a lifesaver for me, and just one piece of advice, and it could be for current students and new ones, is to be organized. It sounds simple, but specifically folders on your computer or folders in Google Drive. What I did, I separated them by semester. So spring 2020, and in that spring 2020 folder, whatever classes I was taking, say 633 or 696, I'm making numbers up, I would have folders for those two classes. And in those folders, I would have assignments, papers, discussion things. I would copy and paste them and make them their own document, just because you really are like just growing your knowledge base, but also thinking about the career and like the job search afterwards, you're going to need writing samples, old thoughts that you had, just little quick questions that you've answered a while ago. And you just want to be like easily like assess that information. So folders broken down by semester, broken down by classes have been awesome. And then also my cohort was amazing. I still talk to several of them. We talk about jobs. I just referred one of my classmates and she got a job and now I got a referral bonus. It's great. Talk to the people who you're in class with and keep in touch, especially because ideally you all have similar interests and shared passions. So that's it. Thank you.
I also am in touch with 2 or 3 of my cohort members as well. So those friendships definitely help when you're in the program and when you leave the program. For my piece of advice, it would be to take care of yourselves. Like seriously, we get so burnt out. I even being in grad school is a burnout, but once you still have that fire and you have that degree and you have that knowledge, you got to take care of yourself because the work is hard and it is ever changing. And if you don't learn how to lean on folks now or get that strong foundation for yourself now, it may take you down a path that may take you longer to succeed. So just really make sure y'all are taking care of yourself, use your networks, use your resources. Do not be afraid to advocate for yourself.
Yeah, and going off of that too, I was in like a couple cohorts because I did the BA/MA program, so I took the classes out of order. So I ended up being in about like 2 or 3 cohorts, and I found that really interesting, like meeting different people constantly. It was actually a lot of fun, like seeing how all the cohorts like interacted, and they all get so close, like online and in person. It's really fun to see and be a part of. My biggest advice that is probably like a broken record is just to go to office hours. Like I went to office hours more than you could imagine because professors just have so much to say, whether it's like about your paper or about stata or about job search. They just like are really there for you, honestly, like more than I can even put to words. I don't think I would have been able to like do as well as I did in the program without like bugging every single professor every week and being like, can you help me with this? And they were just like more than receptive to, and we're just like, you'll learn more from them outside of class, just as much outside of class as you learn in class. And it's just like important to like keep that in perspective.
Alice, before you go, I just want to say that's a life guarantee, a life deal. Obviously, even after you graduate from AU, we love talking to former students and making those connections.
I think it's true. AU people love AU people, not just kids. It's true. It's the whole network. I would say, just to bring it on home, keep the blinders off. I have been fortunate enough to somehow leverage my experience with special ed students with my studies in psychology and now ed policy and leadership with my training as a yoga and fitness instructor to create an incredibly welcoming, inclusive program for students with atypical learning needs. And that's like, it's so many different parts of my interests and identity that I didn't know that I would be able to weave together. You can do that. You can weave different parts of your identity together, ones that don't always seem super cohesive when you first start out. But if you keep those blinders off and look for ways to apply what you're learning in different spaces, you may graduate with an ed policy and leadership degree and pursue a career in economics and statistics. Like, gosh darn it, you just may do it. So inspired. Or go to law school and focus in education law. You never know where the inspiration will strike. And if you keep thinking like this is just for right here and right now, you will miss those opportunities. So keep the blinders off, keep pursuing the things that are you, and find ways to weave those parts of your identity together.
I think that's such a nice way to think about possibility. And in this time of spring and change and hope, I mean, hope that things are really changing for the pandemic and across society, to keep ourselves open to what's possible for ourselves is a really nice way to think about it. So I want to thank Amanda, Tiara, Yvette, and Alex for joining us tonight. This was a great, great panel. I loved seeing you. Welcome back. And thanks to everybody who joined. Have a great night. I'm off to teach class. Take care.